And after the period of 60s, we must discuss such a unique phenomena of Soviet times as esoteric spiritual oven, which actually lasted for 60s, 70s and even 80s. So what was the spiritual oven? It was comprised of people who practiced this or that spiritual practice. And what was interesting about this? It was a group of people which practiced very different things, in sense that being apart from the traditional systems, while being constantly oppressed by KGB and legally prohibited, representatives of esoteric traditions complexly mixed, tangled their practices. It's literally impossible to say what exactly had they practiced. It was yoga and magic and castaneda and Sufism and bioenergetics and spiritual healing and some experiments with psycho-practices, and all of it put together. The main drawback of the Soviet system was the very short influx of new information. Myself, I started practicing yoga in 80s, and I was trying to get the works of Sigmund Freud in the university library. And I was almost excluded from the university for that, because they were within the special keeping. I even made a deliberate mistake in the Freud's surname, so not to be caught, but everything was set. Well, I got Freud's, Carl Jung's and other psychoanalytic works, which were published in the pre-revolutionary Russia, within the help of my father, which had a secret access. But it was a huge problem. I even know one person in Kharkiv who was imprisoned for 5 years for reprinting of Castaneda. This was in 70s. He practiced some Gurdjieff practices, was fond of Castaneda, and he was imprisoned for 5 years for the information which you can buy anywhere now. But there were those who practiced, and the density of practice was immense, and it was the highest intelligentsia. But there were certain upsides. If you were the scientist, you could make all your work within an hour, and then you could do everything which you want to. For instance, reprint esoteric books and study treatises. My mother was deeply involved in the reprinting process called samizdat, self-reprinting, and in my home I still have lots of occult literature reprinted at those times, which was reprinted, secretly given within the society, and so on. That was the atmosphere of spiritual oven of 60s, 70s, 80s, where practitioners were fetched and tempered. Whom can we mention here? Vladimir Danchenko, who published under the alias Number 12. He is still alive, and he has the marvelous portal, the psylib.ru or UA, a huge online library on psychological literature and occult treatises which he had gathered many years. Valery Averyanov, the man who created astral karate. He tried to merge yoga and karate and extrasensorics. He created a system of catching the man on some distance without touching, an interesting and deeply self-made system. He was one of the first who experimented with tantric techniques within his tradition. Antonov experimented with synthesizing yoga and Christianity. Ivanov, the author of the book How to Become the Extrasensoric. He was the first who experimented with freezing, defreezing himself, drying wet clothes on himself, and so on. Well, that were very severe experiments. Bakhtiyarov, who tried to figure out some occult phenomena within laboratories. Vasily Maximov, presumably the teacher of Pelevin, or someone who made a great influence on him, and on many other St. Petersburg practitioners. He went from yoga to Zen practices, the meditative practices. Well, he died quite recently. Igor Kalinauskas, who actually tried to synthesize Western tradition and the Sufi tradition of the East. Tosha, as he is called, the founder of Kunta Yoga, who actually died within his experiments. Boris Zolotov, one of the first creators within the spiritual oven, whose psychological trainings actually emerged from the methodological trainings of Shchedrovitsky. Later on he shifted to psycho-trainings. It was quite a unique person, and the scale of what he did are fascinating even now. Of course, like all the other great men, Zolotov is largely criticized, but I know some people who went through his trainings in the 70s, and it was absolutely amazing in that Soviet times. Mikhail Perepelitsyn, a very powerful extrasensoric, the creator of a very complex system of interconnections between extrasensorics and yoga, the author of several books like Duplex Sphere and the Philosopher's Stone, and so on. He experimented in different ways of working with energy, the extrasensoric vision, and so on. Each of these personalities is the whole new outlook. Nowadays, what they had done sometimes is perceived obsolete and unactual, but at those times it was very unexpected and bright. Those were the people who had hardened themselves within the struggle against the system and the machine of Soviet times, and these were truly charismatic and powerful practitioners. For instance, the Zolotov seminars had gathered around 300 people each, and the effects which were achieved are truly magnificent. Sometimes we have even those who had mastered playing the violin within several hours of playing, and knowing of different language within a day of speak, and that was achieved in the state of collective trance. Contemporary Sinton is the grandson of Zolotov. Each of these personalities is worth the separate speech, but we're limited in time and we have to move